Shadow Hack. Chapter 351, Power Grain Croton. The 10 shadows were continuously hunting monsters, sea beasts, and other big fish of the mid-sea layer. Given that the amount of resources in the North Sea was almost inexhaustible, Li Yunmu had not only formed a stable source of earning a large amount of experience and ability points every day, but he also obtained countless corpses of enormous beasts. System: how is the research and analysis of the Croton going? By this time, Li Yunmu hadn't gone out of the 50th room for 2 days. Even if Wang Yan had come to find him with great enthusiasm a few times, a do not disturb board had been outside his room, blocking everyone out. After prevailing over several challengers, no one insisted on challenging Li Yunmu or looked to find trouble for him. After all, it was only the 50th room. Its allure was far less than that of the front 30 rooms. No one was foolish enough to challenge a person whose strength was comparable to masters of the front 10 rooms over the ownership of the 50th house. Although no one thought that Li Yunmu's strength was among the top 10 flux experts of the 15th residential region, but they could still tell that he was a troublesome opponent. Thus, since he was hard bone which was difficult to swallow, the people stopped challenging him in the past 2 days. Besides, given that Li Yunmu had taken the initiative to fight against 5 people in 1 day, it also meant that he had saved up 5 times the normal resting and reorganization period. One time resting period between 2 fights was 7 days, so after 5 fights he had 35 days. Thus, with more than a month at hand, he didn't need to worry about any challengers who would come to find trouble for him. As long as he didn't want to accept their challenge, he could easily hand the tile of resting phase and unwillingness to battle outside his room. This way, even if others wanted to challenge him, they would be unable to do it. A person not having to fight during the resting phase was one of the few rules of the sect. Because of that, Li Yunmu was living quite an ideal life, but at the same time, he was also in an urgent need of a large amount of contribution points. After investigating for the past few days, he had already found the secret strengthening method to complement the deficiency of his flux points. As he had predicted, there were indeed many methods pertaining to strengthening of the flux points. All of them had been researched for people with weak constitution. It mainly done by the influential clans. Once in a while, 1 or 2 people with innately weak constitution and delicate flux points would appear in the influential clans, making them basically unable to learn any body refining methods, let alone cultivating flux energy. Because of that, secret methods to strengthen flux points as well as innately weak constitutions, meridians, and so on came into being. Among these methods, Li Yunmu had been able to find 2 which were relatively suitable for him in the contribution point store of the 15th residential region. However, their price was very high. In fact, it was excessively high. Even if they were mediocre methods to strengthen flux points, their price still reached 5,000 contribution points. Li Yunmu had to accept that this was a method created by influential clans. Ordinary flux experts would never be able to purchase it. If Li Yunmu didn't possess the ability to shadow hack, his head would probably burst from worry. Yet right then, he was just thinking about methods to earn money. That's right, methods to earn life points. Based on his present skill, Li Yunmu found it impossible to quickly accumulate contribution points. But if speaking about life points, then he could go on an earning spree. He could easily sell the countless corpses of sea beasts hunted by the 10 shadows at ingredient and butcher shops to make a large amount of life points. This was one of his advantages which other people would never be able to replicate. After all, who else had 10 shadows who didn't need to rest and didn't know fatigue, just earning profit all day long? The analysis is already complete. This sort of Croton indeed contains a large amount of blood essence filled with enormous vitality which is blessed with some medicinal liquid which has a natural gentle nature. This mixture has been refined with a sort of bean to produce this cereal. Given that we possess the transcending sage tool refining pagoda, we should be able to refine a power grain similar to Croton. After continuous analysis that lasted for 2 days, the system finally gave him a clear reply. Are you certain? Can we really refine this Croton-like vegetation? Although Li Yunmu was prepared for this in his heart, it was still pounding incessantly because of the excitement after hearing the system's positive reply. The system pondered over it for a while, but still provided a positive reply. According to the results of the calculation, there is a 97% possibility of succeeding in refining a Croton. As long as we can obtain the required raw materials, it won't be a big problem. That's very good. Now put all your energy in analyzing the various types of raw materials required to refine Croton. After a day and a night, the system with its increased efficiency after being upgraded to level 5, was finally able to concretely analyze the raw materials for refining Croton, which was always on Li Yunmu's mind. When Li Yunmu took a look at the information, he was joyous at first, but then his brows knitted. The ingredients required to refine Croton weren't complex. There were only 3 major ones. The first ingredient was the blood essence of an enormous vicious beast, the second ingredient was an ordinary bean of the origin world, while the third ingredient was a medicinal liquid with mild and moderate nature. That's right, Li Yunmu was currently researching the Croton in his hand. It had another name in the origin world, which was power grain. As the name implied, after eating this food for a long time, it would strengthen the person's body, raising their strength and power. This was also the staple food for most flux experts. It was rumored that in the origin world, when one reached the limit of physical cultivation, ordinary food would become unable to offer the nutrition required by the body. Thus came the era of power grain. In this world where humans had innately formidable bodies, power grain became the first choice food. As long as one's strength surpassed that of 15 oxen, they wouldn't feel full regardless of how much of the ordinary food they are. It was gravely lacking in nutrients required for their bodily functions, which would then result in their bodies wasting away and becoming weak. Among the physical flux experts, this condition was known as a dispersing body and declining cultivation. This was a condition which every cultivator whose strength had crossed 15 oxen couldn't avoid. Thus, if they wished to continue improve their strength above that of 15 oxen, they had to switch to power grain from ordinary food. Therefore, it wasn't like anyone who wanted to cultivate could cultivate because once a person began doing it, they would have to consider the financial problems. From those in wretched poverty to ordinary citizens and even those of bourgeois class, none of them were able to pay the enormous expenses required to cultivate. Just the power grain alone was a major expense unless one was in a sect. Thus, sects were very popular existences within the origin world and never lacked disciples. However, power grain actually wasn't the only method to obtain the required nutrients. Chapter 352, Deciphering the Secret Recipe. There were actually many types of power grain in the origin world, but basically all of them were naturally formed. They more some vegetation or fruit which had accumulated enormous vitality. Another example would be some vicious beast or sea beast's flesh which had attained enormous vitality. These two were seen as power grains by the people of the origin world. Therefore, the term power grain was a general term which included all edible life forms that contained enormous vitality. All of the above mentioned were naturally formed power grains. In comparison, there were only a scant few types of power grains which could be mass-produced. Croton just happened to be one of the postnatal power grains which had been refined by the natives of the origin world after countless years of research. It was considered the most popular power grain among the natives as well as having the best quality-price ratio. According to Li Yunmu's increased understanding gained in the last few days in Blue Moon Island, Croton was used by more than 90% of the flux experts. The minimum amount required by a flux expert possessing the strength of 50 oxen was around 5 to 10 tons of Croton just to keep their body functioning and not develop weakness. If one wanted to increase their strength to the next step, then every day they had to eat even more Croton. If a flux expert wanted to strengthen their body to the limit, they would have to eat from 30 to 100 tons. Only then could they reach the maximum limit. In other words, if one wanted to cultivate quicker and increase the strength of their corporeal body, the amount of Croton required far surpasses the measly 5 to 10 tons. Instead, the least amount required would be 30 tons or more, depending on the flux expert's ability to absorb the power grain. If the absorption potential was large, then 30 tons would be sufficient, but if it was small, then 100 tons would be required. If someone cultivated an extremely high-level body refining method, then even 100 tons would be far from sufficient. Therefore, it wouldn't be the slightest exaggeration to say that Croton power grain was actually a necessary resource for cultivating the body. Among the natives of the origin world, there was a popular saying that 1 grain of Croton was equivalent to a ton of rice. The idea behind it was that the price of 1 grain of Croton could purchase a ton of rice. The origin world was extremely vast, close to the extent of being endless. Almost no one had been able to survey its endpoints, so obviously the large population of life forms was also unable to fill it to the extremity. It was said that the human population of the origin world had already crossed 3 trillion. However, this was only after surveying the known cities and towns. As for those people living in the wilderness, heavens only knew how many of them there were. It simply couldn't be investigated. But even then, 3 trillion was the known population. It was extremely shocking for Li Yunmu. However, this allowed him to understand the reason behind why, even though the natives of this world had innately formidable bodies as well as a large population, the numbers of flux experts were small. It wasn't that the natives of the origin world didn't have sufficient aptitude for flux cultivation, but that they were too poor and most of them weren't able to keep up with their need of power grains. Li Yunmu also gained a better understanding of why he was only able to attain the power of a dozen oxen even though he cultivated his physical body both from the outside, using the supreme body refining technique Great Sun Thunder Tyrant Body Muscle Marrow Secrets, and inside, using the Devil Dragon Bone refining secrets. The regulations of the world seemed to have silently shackled the natives of the origin world. When a person broke through the power of 15 oxen, they would most often not be able to find a sufficient supply of corresponding food that could provide them with enough nutrients. This was the main reason why Li Yunmu only had the strength of 18 oxen. His strength had increased by 3 oxen because after descending to the origin world, he had been eating only the flesh of the vicious beasts which had incidentally helped his strength to increase. Thus, refining Croton became his main priority for the near future. It was said that the method was mainly in the hands of an ancient influential clan which had been increasing gradually over generations. Li Yunmu naturally wasn't foolish enough to pit himself against an ancient influential clan. This was because he had the assistance of the system's great calculating ability as well as the refining pagoda which he had swindled from H.A.C.K. There was a chance that he would be able to produce a power grain similar to Croton, but he didn't want to spread this sort of power grain everywhere to make a killing. He wanted to control a territory the size of Blue Moon Island, including all its subsidiary islands. The profit gained from this should make him sufficiently wealthy. This kind of wealth should be enough for him to purchase all sorts of secret methods as well as open the lacking flux points. That's right, this was the path that Li Yunmu had decided to walk. As for the 10 contribution points the masters of front 10 rooms were earning, that was just nonsense. If he chose that path, only God knew how long he would have to wait to accumulate the required amount of contribution points to purchase the things he wanted. He continued to study the research information pertaining to the ingredients of Croton, which the system had offered, while sometimes knitting his brows and sometimes relaxing them. The blood essence of a vicious beast which possessed a certain amount of vitality was the main ingredient which he already possessed. The 10 shadows killed a large amount of sea beasts every day, which could easily be used by the refining pagoda to refine a large amount of blood essence. This was the basis behind Li Yunmu's confidence to imitate Croton. After all, he had this transcending sage treasure which could be used for refining. The refining pagoda which he had swindled from H.A.C.K had 9 levels in total. The first level was for refining essence, the second level for energy, while the third level for soul. As for the remaining 6 levels, his strength was insufficient to open them. However, even so the third level of refining pagoda was enough to prove its reputation as a transcending sage tool and that it was on a higher level than the void disk. Flux Ancestor had placed a total of 3 transcending sage tools in Tower of Glory, including the Void Disk at the 25th level, the Hidden Moons constellation at the 50th level, and the Refining Pagoda at the 70th level, making sure that it was considered supreme even among the transcending sage tools. And now, this transcending sage tool was finally reflecting its value. The requirement of a large amount of blood of vicious beasts was settled, so Li Yunmu's next priority was to find a harmonious liquid with a moderate nature. He was almost certain that the method to refine Croton was largely related to the harmonious liquid with a moderate nature. System, can you identify this liquid? Or perhaps suggest something which could replace it? On Blue Moon Island's west coast, several miles away from the coastline where the seabed was 3,600 meters deep, Li Yunmu was attentively watching his 10 shadows kill giant fish in one another's vicinity. Occasionally, when they would encounter a formidable vicious beast, a fierce battle would erupt at the bottom of the ocean. Li Yunmu had found that this ocean bed was the most suitable mid-sea region to establish the refining pagoda after the system had done a repeated scanning of the surrounding 300 kilometers. Once the data was gathered, the final conclusion of the analysis was that few people entered this ocean bed in the mid-sea region. Given the physical strength of ordinary fishermen, they would be unable to endure the pressure at the depth of 3,600 meters. As for the disciples of Blue Moon sect, they also wouldn't take the risk to reach this mid-sea region's ocean bed. The reason for that was very simple, because this mid-sea zone's ocean bed was the nest of tiger fish. These creatures were barely considered to have entered the category of vicious beasts. Each of them was the size of 5 meters, and their individual strength couldn't be considered formidable. Perhaps even a physical flux expert who had the strength of 15 oxen would be able to easily kill this kind of fish if they had a suitable weapon. However, tiger fish swam in large. But the tiger fish formed large schools, thus turning themselves into one of the demons which flux experts hoped to never encounter in the depths of the ocean. This was because regardless of the individual strength, these fish possessed 2 extremely sharp teeth which could easily rip apart the bodies of flux experts. After repeated scanning, the system proved this fact, and chose this position as the place to conceal the installed refining pagoda. At this instant, Li Yunmu personally dived into the ocean. Originally, with his strength of 18 oxen, he should be unable to endure the pressure at the depth of 3,600 meters. It was enough to crush any flux expert whose strength hadn't attained at least 30 oxen of physical power. However, when all is said and done, Li Yunmu was different from ordinary flux experts. After all, he cultivated many peak-level defensive cultivation methods. The terrifying defense of his body, regardless if it was inside or outside, could easily sustain the pressure which far exceeded his physical strength. The pressure of 3,600 meters wasn't his limit. In fact, by activating the 5 times strengthened Great Heart, he could easily remain underwater for 3 hours without breathing. These 2 points alone could provide him with enough time to attain his goal in the ocean. Li Yunmu first placed the refining pagoda in the position picked by the system. Then, he used a large amount of his flux energy to hold onto the treasure and thrust it under the ground in the specified position in the ocean floor. Instantly, the 45-meter-long red-colored ancient pagoda was stably established in the ocean bed. Success! After the refining pagoda was installed, Li Yunmu handed over the remaining matters to Li Yun's team, after which there was no longer any need for him to stay within the ocean. Availing himself with the opportunity that the sky hadn't turned milky yet, he quickly returned to the 15th residential area at the foot of Blue Moon Mountain. After returning to his room, Li Yunmu closed his eyes and calmed down. Soon, the first-person view of the 10 shadows appeared in his consciousness sea. He randomly chose Li Lan's field of view and discovered that the shadows had already started working under his command. The first 8 shadows who were named had already divided themselves into 2 squads with 4 people per squad and began to kill any monster in their vicinity that belonged to vicious beast category. So far, the monster they hunted the most was still the overlord of this region, tiger fish. As their name suggested, they had patterns that resembled that of a tiger on their body and possessed 4 tiger claws. They also had sharp teeth and an extremely savage nature. They often appeared in schools of 10 or even 100. If the defense of shadows wasn't sufficiently good, then they would have been unable to resist these savage fish monsters of mid-sea region. But as it was, these cruel fish could only attack jointly in vain until they were beheaded one after another. The 9th and 10th shadows didn't participate in the battle of Li Yun's group. Instead, they dragged the corpses away and put them within the refining pagoda installed under the ocean floor to refine the blood essence of the fish that belonged to the category of vicious beasts. Every grain of Croton cost 1 life point in the 15th residential region. According to the system's calculation, 5 grams of blood essence refined from the flesh of vicious beasts was required to refine a single grain of Croton. The 9th and 10th shadows were successively placing one fish monster after another into the first level of the refining pagoda where blood essence was refined. In less than several hours, more than 700 grams blood essence was refined. When Li Yunmu saw this harvest, his heart began to pound wildly. This was a truly great development. Using 5 grams of vicious beast blood essence within ordinary beans would create 1 marble-sized grain of Croton. Yet in less than 3 hours, he had collected 770 grams of blood essence. In other words, every hour he was collecting 250 grams of blood essence, or 50 grains of Croton. If he kept doing this every day for 24 hours, he could refine 1,200 grains of Croton. Given that the price of 1 grain of Croton was 1 life point, it would be equal to 1,200 life points. Since the exchange rate of life points to contribution points was 100 to 1, this would result in 12 contribution points. Compared to the masters of the front 10 rooms who received only 10 contribution points every day while receiving multiple challenges, Li Yunmu's harvest was better. This rate of collecting contribution points shook Li Yunmu's spirit. Sure enough, his thoughts had been correct. But this refining speed was still insufficient. It was far from his plan to collect a large amount of contribution points in a short time. It was only that with just 10 shadows killing the monsters, the efficiency was low. If he wanted to get more work done, he needed to add more manpower so that the refining pagoda could be supplied with an even larger number of vicious beast corpses. Only then would the rate at which he was collecting the ingredients would increase. At that moment, Li Yunmu made the decision to use the 306-limbed ape gods. It was time to display their proper usage, as how an army is trained for 1,000 days only for an hour's use. Even the quasi-deities wouldn't have thought that the 300-something ape gods which Li Yunmu had collected after braving countless trials and smuggled to the origin world after great difficulty wouldn't be nurtured into his guardian beasts, but get used as physical labor to increase the output of production. Chapter 353, Iron Pistil Wood's Aqua Armor. The strength of an individual ape god was quite formidable. In the 5th dimension, they could be considered as one of the few peak rainbow crystal monsters. Once they consumed a drop of divine blood and awakened their ancestral bloodline, which allowed them to transform into 6-limbed ape gods, their strength had increased even more. Not only had they obtained another pair of limbs, the tyrannical bloodline flowing through their bodies had become even more powerful. Because of that, the 6-limbed ape gods easily adapted to the 66 times higher gravity. The reason why Li Yunmu had taken the risk to smuggle them into the origin world was because he saw 3 major advantages to their bodies. First was their physical strength as well as their almost undying state. As long their head and brain weren't shattered, their limbs and other body parts would regrow due to their bloodline. Second, ape gods were one of the few species of monsters in the 5th dimension which possessed intelligence. In regards to it, they only lost to humans and could be trained with relative ease. The third factor was also the most important one: ape gods were one of the few species who could learn to cultivate battle skills and cultivation methods. Because of this, 4-limbed ape gods were nurtured by many sects as the guardian beasts of their sects on Earth. The 6-limbed ape gods under Li Yunmu's command were much more formidable compared to 4-limbed ape gods. Regardless of whether it was their physical strength, bloodline, or the extra pair of arms, they surpassed them in all fields. But the most important thing was that they also cultivated the Great Sun's secret technique of H.A.C.K, which allowed them to use the sun god flame energy, a type of dark flux energy. Apart from this, they also cultivated H.A.C.K 8 steps, which allowed them to display their explosive strength. It could be said that the current six-limbed ape gods were extremely formidable existences. According to the system's evaluation of their present strength, they already possessed power of 10 oxen while their flux energy reached 45 points. This level of combat strength was equivalent to that of formidable fluxers who had stepped upon the 70th level within Tower of Glory. Although their strength couldn't be compared to that of Descenders, their large numbers were enough to compensate. What made Li Yunmu even more happy, though, was that these ape gods could also live underwater. As long as their brains weren't damaged, they wouldn't die. After thinking about this, a question gradually arose in Li Yunmu's mind. System, if I released all the ape gods in the ocean to assist the shadows in hunting monsters, what would be their survival rate? It was obvious that if all the ape gods were used, then the hunting of the sea beasts would be accelerated, but he didn't dare to make the decision lightly. After all, not only had he invested a drop of divine blood on each ape god to awaken their ancestral bloodline, he had also racked his brains and taken all sorts of risks to smuggle them over. It was a certainty that if they were nurtured to become more powerful, they would definitely become a hidden trump card in Li Yunmu's struggle for supremacy in the origin world. Let alone speaking of losing 8 or 10, even if 2 or 3 of them died, Li Yunmu would feel his heart hurt. Therefore, the prerequisite of using the ape gods for him was that their survival rate should be more than 90%. Otherwise, the losses definitely wouldn't make up for the gains. After a simple analysis, the system determined that the survival rate of the ape gods in the mid-sea region would be 24% at most. This meant that out of 100 ape gods who would have to face the attacks of tigerfish at the ocean floor, 76 would die in a day. This would mean that only 24 would be left to meet the day after. This sort of low survival rate sent a chill down Li Yunmu's spine. When all was said and done, the strength of individual six-limbed apes placed them at the top of the 5th dimension. They could even be said to be comparable to 8 rainbow light devil kings. However, they were about to confront the sea beasts of the mid-sea region in the origin world, all of whom were enormous monsters that belonged to the category of vicious beasts. Ape gods were much weaker when compared to the 10 shadows, each of which had the same strength as Li Yunmu. Yet those shadows died occasionally, so how could it be that the ape gods which were weaker wouldn't die? Is there no way to improve such a low survival rate? Asked Li Yunmu, not willing to give up on this line of thought. If Host could prepare a set of heavy armor for each of them, then perhaps their survival rate could be increased to 80% or higher. As long as their head is protected, then given their numbers and almost undying bodies, they would suffer heavy injuries but wouldn't die completely, the system replied after some pondering. As always, it provided the most apt suggestion for Li Yunmu. This suggestion focused on the hard-to-destroy bodies of the ape gods. As long as the brain was protected, Li Yunmu's worries wouldn't come true. Even if the ape gods were heavily injured, they would heal after a good meal. This suggestion immediately settled the worry which had plagued Li Yunmu. He then quickly acted to put this plan in action. The next day, he walked to the mission plaza of the 15th residential region. There, he randomly took a few missions and even rented a sea beast to leave Blue Moon Island. After 10 days, he appeared in the vicinity of a subsidiary island known as Ocean Pavilion Island. This place was famous for its blacksmiths. The weapons and armor created by them were unique in the territory of Blue Moon Island. This came to because Ocean Pavilion Island had the best material for creating armor, iron pistil tree. Its timber was even harder than the hardest type of iron and was exclusive to Ocean Pavilion Island. Among the natives of this island, the usage of iron pistil wood was very large. Whether to create a several hundred meters large cruise or an iron pistil bow or any other sort of weapon, there was a variety of applications. But the true reason behind the reputation of the iron pistil tree was that the armor created with it was most suitable one for physical flux experts. Not only was the iron pistil tree harder than any type of iron, it was also lighter than even pig iron. But this wasn't the true reason why it was considered as the most optimum material to create battle armor. The true reason was that iron pistil wood possessed a certain amount of buoyancy, so both physical and not flux experts could also fight underwater. It was not only lighter but also allowed the user's body to maintain its agility underwater, thus it wasn't a wonder that the natives considered it a unique natural resource. Without any hesitation, Li Yunmu ordered 500 battle armor made of iron pistil wood which were especially thick around the head. Iron pistil armor was 5 centimeters thick, which was enough to protect against the attacks of the tiger fish. In order to pay for the batch of iron pistil aqua armor, Li Yunmu had to give away almost all the corpses of sea beasts he had deposited in his heavenly world as payment. Chapter 354, Secret Base. After wantonly procurement of a large amount of iron pistil aqua armor, a major transformation happened at the depths of Blue Moon Island's west coast. The 10 shadows had divided into 5 groups. Every 2 shadows formed a group with one becoming the leader and another the vice leader. Every group had 50 ape gods in their hunting squad. Altogether, 5 hunting squads roamed in a hunt for a large amount of sea beasts that belonged to the category of vicious beasts. They only hunted these, not bothering the ordinary ocean life forms. Over a period of time, this caused the mid-sea region to have increasingly more shoals of fish as well as other aquatic life forms. This caused new sea monsters that belonged to the vicious beast category in the surroundings to come over in an attempt to obtain food. They were steadily being lured in like moths to a flame. Li Yunmu could clearly see that after the addition of 350 ape gods, the efficiency of hunting went up by a notch when compared to the 10 shadows hunting alone. Although the strength of individual 6-limbed ape gods was far from that of the shadows, their large numbers complemented this deficiency. On top of that, because they possessed 3 pairs of powerful arms, each ape god would use 6 weapons, which allowed them to display their monstrous power. The amount of blood essence refined from the flesh of sea beasts using the refining pagoda explosively rose from 700 grams to more than 10,000 grams. A day's harvest was sufficient for Li Yunmu to refine 2,000 grains of Croton, which made him go mad with joy. Moreover, once the hunting squads became more experienced and made some adjustments to improve their tactics, the efficiency began to grow even more. However, it was a matter that progressed slowly. The 350 ape gods currently adorned iron pistil wood's aquatic armor as well as held a total of 6 harpoons. Apart from this, after 250 ape gods were entered into hunting squads, the remaining 100 were given other duties under the system's adjustments. Li Yunmu ordered 50 ape gods to form a rescue squad. Their main responsibility was to rescue their comrades who were seriously injured during battle. They then were to retreat from the front line with the injured parties while making sure that their heads didn't receive repeated injuries which would result in death. As long as the brains of the ape gods weren't shattered, they would be like cockroaches, only injured but not dead. Once they were supplied with a large amount of flesh as food, their shattered bodies would heal, and even their limbs would regenerate. Due to the independent rescue squad of 50, several severely injured ape gods were saved. After continuously working for more than 10 days, they became proficient with the division of labor and cooperative work. In the last few days, very few ape gods had been devoured by the sea beasts. Li Yunmu felt extremely glad that he had successfully protected his hidden trump card which could be used in future power struggles. Before long, the last 50 ape gods were also bestowed a mission. They established an offshore patrol. The group of 50 divided into 10 small squads who patrolled the region round the clock to make sure that the secret would never be revealed. With such continuous systematic adjustments, Li Yunmu gradually discovered his secret base for refining the blood essence of vicious beasts had turned into an effective ordinary workplace. At the moment, even he had no wish to intervene. Every day, 8 to 15 kilograms of refined blood essence would be harvested, providing him with materials to gain a large amount of wealth. Time kept passing, and with such a busy schedule, 3 months went by since Li Yunmu entered Blue Moon Island. Zhang Xuan and the other two descenders came to find Li Yunmu every few days, giving him a feeling that what they were planning wasn't small. By then, they had roped in some powerful natives, but Li Yunmu happened to be their earliest and most important chess piece. This was especially so given that Li Yunmu had silently seized the 50th room and kept hold over it for 3 months, making him even more mysterious in the eyes of Zhang Xuan and his group. 3 months had passed without an event. Under the pretense of being of noble birth, Zhang Quan's group had lured quite a few powerful native flux experts, gradually forming a small faction. If Li Yunmu's guess wasn't wrong, then these people from another plane were going to move soon. They were only waiting for their small faction to become a little more powerful, or maybe a little more stable. However, Zhang Xuan and his followers had no idea that the native with extraordinary strength whom they had lured the earliest was actually a viper hiding among them, waiting for them to reveal their secret before attacking. One day, Wang Yan knocked on Li Yunmu's door once more. In the past few days, Zhang Xuan and them had become increasingly more puzzled by Li Yunmu's mysterious disappearances. However, the more he acted this way, the higher they regarded him. At the same time, Wang Yan was more and more attracted toward this mysterious but confident native who had extraordinary strength. Upon coming over, she didn't have many illusions about a positive answer regarding her knocking. After all, 9 out of 10 times, Li Yunmu wouldn't be in his residence, but busy with some secret mission. However, the next instant the door opened. Wang Yan's charming face then betrayed her emotions, pleasant surprise overtaking her features. "Elder brother Yunmu, you have finally returned." After the door opened, Li Yunmu appeared with the usual calm expression on his face. Wang Yan almost subconsciously entered his room, but then suddenly remembered about ladylike manners, and it caused her face to turn a little red. Outside the room, she asked, "What happened?" Li Yunmu didn't feel anything about the seductive movements of Wang Yan. He stepped aside and politely asked her to enter. He had maintained a relationship with Zhang Quan's group, but also kept a certain distance from them, never taking the initiative to offer anything which caused them to take the initiative to rope him in. This was the attitude which Li Yunmu had taken toward these descenders in the past few months. Only the independence coupled with willingness to negotiate made his position in the mind of Zhang Quan's group to become even more important. Similarly, it also caused them to lower their guards in front of him. The interesting thing was that Li Yunmu's guess was pretty good. In the past few days while he had been busy with the production of Croton, his actions had dispelled the last bits of suspicion toward him in the hearts of Zhang Xuan and his group. Li Yunmu had a feeling that Wang Yan had definitely come to him this time to discuss something serious. He, who was a chess piece with extraordinary strength in their minds, was certainly going to be pulled into the center of action. Chapter 355, An Underestimated Limit-Breaking Method. Sure enough, Wang Yan had indeed come with a certain matter this time. "Elder brother Yunmu, we were doing a mission last month when we discovered a secret cave." Wang Yan recounted the crucial events of their previous mission, until the existence of a secret underground cave came to the surface. Only, did they really find this secret underground cave because of something unexpected while doing a mission? Li Yunmu naturally didn't believe her words. In his opinion, this was definitely one of the secrets for which the Descenders had come to join Blue Moon sect. They were just like him who had been told by Battle Sage Vega to come to this place and find a secret location. Li Yunmu just prayed that the secret region she had asked him to find wasn't the same one which Wang Yan was talking about. Otherwise, this would make it extremely difficult for Li Yunmu to infiltrate the upper echelons of Blue Moon sect and may even expose his identity. This is. After Wang Yan was done recounting the details of the mission and mentioned the matter of the secret underground cave, she took out an intact manuscript. This is a training method to improve a body's defenses to a formidable level. Brother Zhang Xuan said that as long as Brother Yunmu helps us with our task, this will be your reward, Wang Yan said while looking at Li Yunmu with longing. Cross-cover armor. At the first glance, Li Yunmu's mind was jolted slightly. This was indeed an extremely formidable limit-breaking method which allowed someone with a tyrannical physical body to display their defense to the extreme. Earlier, when Zuolei used this skill, the flesh under his precise control had divided into several square-shaped pieces and formed an armor. From the outside, it looked as if he was wearing an armor of hardened flesh. If Li Yunmu cultivated this skill to a minor threshold, he could fight against blades and knives with his bare hands, while if he cultivated this skill to a major threshold, he could resist natural calamities with his body alone. From the skill choice, it became even more clear that Azure Dragon Island's Hall Mater Buletanji had been assassinated by these people. They seemed to have gained a great harvest from him. At the moment, Li Yunmu was certain that this cross-cover armor copy was part of Buletanji's inheritance. Otherwise, they would have to have the original manuscript of this limit-breaking method. Li Yunmu thought about it, then agreed bluntly. "All right, I agree, so when you are all prepared to go out, contact me. Then I will give this manuscript to you first. It would be best if you used the time until the expedition to cultivate it." Wang Yan suddenly delivered the manuscript to Li Yunmu. "Hey? If you do this and Zhang Chuan discovers, won't it be embarrassing for you?" Li Yunmu hesitated slightly, not accepting the manuscript right away. Wang Yan's actions caused him to hesitate. It wasn't that he didn't want this, but he had never anticipated that she would just quietly deliver this manuscript to him. He was certain that a leader like Zhang Chuan would never act in such a relaxed manner. Then this woman in front of him, could she have decided on this on her own? As long as elder brother Yunmu doesn't say anything, no one will know. Truth be told, that secret underground cave is extremely dangerous. Elder brother Yunmu, take my advice and cultivate it, but unless you run into extreme danger, don't display it to others. Wang Yan handed over the manuscript and quickly ran away. Once she was gone, Li Yunmu still felt a little awkward while holding the manuscript. He hadn't expected that a woman from another plane would become so passionate about him that she would even reveal her own secret. "System, how is this cross-cover armor?" Li Yunmu shook his head, putting this matter at the back of his mind. He recorded the manuscript in the system for storage and comprehensive scanning. In truth, Li Yunmu wasn't knowledgeable about the differences between limit-breaking and body-refining methods. When he killed Devil, he had obtained various cultivation methods of the Ghost clan. Among them was Ghost King's body-refining method, which was a pinnacle-level cultivation method. However, there was a stringent condition needed to be fulfilled to cultivate it. This condition was that he must possess the bloodline of the Ghost clan. Thus, this cross-cover armor that had no conditions was a perfectly suitable method for Li Yunmu to train his defense. This cross-cover armor is at least A grade. If it could be repaired, it could even approach S level. This method is extremely suitable for natives who have innately formidable bodies. It can strengthen their physical bodies to the extreme, and the more formidable is one's cultivation, the more formidable would be the effects of this cultivation method. It would be best for host to cultivate this cultivation method together with Great Sun Thunder Tyrant Body Muscle Marrow Secrets and Devil Dragon Bone Refining Secrets. After cultivating this method, the defensive strength of the host's physical body will be displayed to the extreme. As expected, the system gave a high evaluation for cross-cover armor. According to Li Yunmu's thoughts, this limit-breaking cultivation method had to be at least B grade. But what he hadn't expected was the system declaring that under special circumstances, it could even surpass Ghost King's body refining method. After hearing this, Li Yunmu obviously wouldn't miss the chance to train this method. Presently, the cultivation of his Great Sun Thunder Tyrant Body Muscle Marrow Secrets had reached a bottleneck because the source energy required to cultivate this method far surpassed the level of flux energy and dark flux energy. Even the system's ability points couldn't be used to upgrade it. So he had to wait until the system had been upgraded to the 10th level, when it could research and create an all-new type of energy unit which could finally be used to upgrade the Great Sun Thunder Tyrant Body Muscle Marrow Secrets. However, the system was only at the 5th level currently, which has opened an all-new hacking feature. The shadows could now be detached from his mind and hack in the entire world. But the system was still a long way off from being upgraded to the 6th level. To achieve it, it needed to absorb a special item. Thus, the system's upgrade had also stagnated for the time being, because of which he couldn't advance the cultivation of Great Sun Thunder Tyrant Body Muscle Marrow Secrets. Thus, regardless of whether it was the Great Sun or Tyrant Body, the cultivation of both had been left to stay at a minor threshold. Otherwise, if Li Yunmyu could cultivate them to a higher level and accumulate more of the Flame Thunder energy, he wouldn't need to advance step by rising from Flux Expert to Great Flux Expert to Sage Flux Expert. Therefore, cross-cover armor was the best way for Li Yunmyu to spend a large amount of ability points which he had accumulated recently. Not only could he cultivate this technique himself, as long as he had sufficient space elements, he could even make cultivation relaying globe to increase the strength of his ape gods by teaching them this limit-breaking method. At this moment, Li Yunmyu felt that Zheng Xuan was just a fool with no eyes. Since his group's physical bodies weren't powerful, he didn't value this manuscript much and easily gave it to Li Yunmyu to rope him in. If they were to learn its true worth in the future, then heaven only knew what sort of reactions they would have. It's good, there's still some time left before Zheng Xuan and the rest will be done with their preparations. This period of time is sufficient to increase my strength to the next level. In a split second, Li Yunmyu carefully planned out his next steps. In the upcoming days, not only did he cultivate the cross-cover armor, but also refined Croton. He planned to accumulate enough life points before leaving to get his hands on a method to strengthen his flux points. Chapter 356, Whale City. Whale Island was the only large business center in the southern part of North Blue. It also had the only city in this region whose population surpassed 10 million people. It was under the supervision of Whale Master, and it was classified as the territory of Whale administrative power, which was the strongest sect in the southern part of North Blue. Blue Moon sect wasn't even worth mentioning in front of this sect. The difference between it and the other countless independent sects was that the purpose of the Whale sect was to defend North Blue for as long as it'll exist. Thus, it was both the sect surpassing all others and the only one which possessed an extremely neutral stance. As long as the islands in North Blue weren't assaulted or threatened, Whale sect wouldn't take any side. This caused Whale Island's position to become superior, which created the most prosperous and developed business center in the southern part of North Blue. One day, that city which countless vagrants entered every day, was visited by a mysterious character. That person was Li Yunmyu. When he walked out of the transfer channel to the Whale Island, he was shocked by the large city. It was spectacular, magnificent, flourishing, and built in the traditional style of the origin world. It was different from any city on Earth. With more than 10 million people residing within its walls, with more than 1 million people entering and exiting it every day, this place surpassed all the cities on Earth. Perhaps only the 3 king-level cities of the central continent could barely pit themselves against this place. The most unexpected thing for Li Yunmyu was that it was unlike any other city on Earth, since there were no advanced technological civilization here. There were no monorails or hovercrafts flying over the city. In fact, there wasn't even electricity. Nor were there any weapons developed using dark technology. This was an ancient city of 10 million people in its truest sense, but its grand atmosphere wasn't the least bit lacking compared to any city from a more technologically advanced civilization. The first thing which attracted Li Yunmyu's attention were the buildings. They weren't tall, with the highest one not surpassing 5 floors. However, they were unusually large. Every floor was around 15 meters in height. The materials used to construct them included large blocks of naturally formed steel stones which were both firm and didn't corrode because of the humidity. And in this enormous city, Li Yunmyu for the first time saw all sorts of giants. The smallest one among them reached 3 meters. Others natives were up to 5 meters, but even they weren't the tallest. Walking here and there were giants of 9 meters. When Li Yunmyu saw them moving unhurriedly by his side, he took in a deep breath. Fierce, extremely fierce. Even if the system hadn't scanned and analyzed their strength, Li Yunmyu could sense their explosive strength after seeing their robust bodies. This sort of purest fleshly strength was the basic sort of strength in this world. Li Yunmyu, who had stably settled in the origin world, was no longer the clueless descender from before. He was extremely clear that these giants who surpassed 5 meters were great flux experts whose strength reached 50 oxen. Those who reached 7 meters had already entered Sage Layer. After exiting the transfer channel and scanning the surroundings, Li Yunmyu had instantly discovered 3 people whose height reached 7 meters. In the big picture, the strength of the origin world was far more terrifying when compared to that of Earth. Without any capital backing him, Li Yunmyu could only be careful and hide his fangs, concealing his ambitions. "Lord, may I ask how can we serve you?" After exiting the transfer channel, he was welcomed by few beast-taming masters. The characteristics of Li Yunmyu's body were quite clear. With his height reaching 1.8 m, everyone waiting by the transfer channel had the same thought, that he was a noble. In the societal structure of the origin world, only the nobles could maintain their body structure while treading on the path of cultivation. Li Yunmyu wasn't the least bit polite. He acted his part and commanded in a domineering tone, "Lead me to the city's power grain shopping center." "Yes, may I invite Lord to get on the ride?" The eyes of the beast-taming masters began to shine, and all of them tried their best to invite Li Yunmyu to ride their beast. Behind them, a few strength-type beasts were waiting. Li Yunmyu knew that these beast-taming masters were like the taxi drivers on Earth. The only difference was that the position of these beast-taming masters was inferior in status compared to taxi drivers. They were the lowest rung existence, even lower than civilians. Besides beast vehicles, the only way to travel through the large whale city was to walk on foot, which was too slow and too tiring. Li Yunmyu thought about it casually and decided on a cordial beast-taming master who was controlling an enormous tortoise-like strength-type beast. He entered the carriage on its back. This was his first time using a means of transportation in the origin world, and it was rather interesting. Perhaps, since it was his first time coming to the whale city, everything filled him with great curiosity. Soon, the tortoise-shaped beast began to move stably, but at a rather fast speed which far surpassed Li Yunmyu's expectations. While enjoying the scenery, Li Yunmyu casually asked, "What type of strength beast is this?" He wasn't worried about revealing his class, because the origin world was enormous and possessed countless different types of beasts and living creatures. Every region and every area had its own specialties, so not knowing about this tortoise-shaped beast was completely ordinary. The natives divided the various beasts into different types in the origin world. In ascending order, they were named wild beasts, strength beasts, vicious beasts, enormous beasts, and desolate beasts. Among them, the weakest were the wild beasts. Animals like lions and tigers on Earth belonged to this class, but they weren't the kings of this class. Then came the strength beasts who were more formidable than wild beasts. They had sturdier and more powerful bodies, but their offensive power was ordinary, thus they were called strength beasts. Naturally, this offensive power not being formidable was only for the natives of the origin world. If someone from Earth were to try and control them, the only outcome would be a tragedy. Chapter 357, Becoming Wealthy in a Day. There was no need to say much about the vicious beasts. The beasts hunted by Li Yunmyu in the past few days had all belonged to that category. The 5-meter-long tiger fish were barely considered to have entered the category of vicious beasts. If they didn't form groups or possess their savage nature, they wouldn't be considered even the lowest-ranked vicious beasts. As for giant beasts, as the name implied, the lowest among them surpassed 30 meters. "Lord, this is a hybrid 8-pillar mountain tortoise. Its main characteristic is its smooth movement after speeding up and great endurance. In one day, it can travel up to 8,000 kilometers, even through complex terrain," the beast-taming master answered sincerely. But based on his tone, he didn't seem the least bit pleased with himself. From this, it was clear that this 8-pillar mountain tortoise wasn't considered outstanding. But in the ears of Li Yunmu, it was like a joke. Incomparable, truly incomparable. The difference between Earth and this origin world couldn't be described in just one sentence. Such a terrifying monster was only an ordinary mount in the origin world. If they were on Earth, this 8-pillar mountain tortoise would have been priceless. With its height surpassing 5 meters and 8 legs which resembled stone pillars, it was no wonder that it was named 8-pillar mountain tortoise. It was able to travel 8,000 kilometers in a day, which would be considered as terrifying on Earth. Riding on it, traveling from one side of the Earth to the other would be an effortless task. But in the origin world, 8,000 miles wouldn't even cover the territory of a third-rate sect like Blue Moon Island. Therefore, there was nothing that the beast-taming master could feel complacent about. Although he was saying that it was pretty fast, it was only bragging. Before long, the speed of the 8-pillar mountain tortoise became faster. In less than 2 minutes, Li Yunmu found that the speed of this mount had already surpassed 150 km/h. And this was still the bustling city street, which allowed Li Yunmu to gain another experience in the origin world. This made him quite astonished. It had to be said that the layout of Whale City was truly impressive. Even if they were traveling on a secondary street, it had 32 lanes. Because of that, even though they were traveling through a city street, it wasn't the least bit congested. After roughly 30 minutes, Li Yunmu arrived at his destination. He paid the beast-taming master 10 silver sand coins, which caused the other party to be pleased beyond expectations and thank him profoundly. Li Yunmu had reached the Power Grain Transaction Center. Both sides of this street were filled with stores where physical and not flux experts could buy their power grains. Seeing this scene, Li Yunmu remembered Good News Pavilion in the virtual dimension. He had to admit that trading in reality, without the virtual dimension and Good News Pavilion, was extremely complex. He chose one small grain shop and entered without hesitation. In the past few days, he had accumulated 50,000 grams of vicious beast blood essence, due to the combined efforts of shadows and more than 306 armed ape gods. Li Yunmu had procured a large amount of ordinary beans from nearby islands, and according to a method prescribed by the system, he finally refined his first batch of Croton. "Lord, is there anything I can assist you with?" At this moment, a young attendant recognized Li Yunmu's distinctive appearance and temperament, certain that he wasn't a barbarian. It has to be said that Descender's body stature was a big advantage for them in the origin world. It was something that none of them had thought about before. However, this superiority could diminish very quickly. If Descenders continued to quickly increase their physical strength in the origin world, their body size would also begin to grow, unless they quickly got their hands on the secret method used by the nobles. This was a difficult problem which Li Yunmu needed to solve urgently. "I have come here to get a batch of Croton appraised and get their price." Li Yunmu didn't beat around the bush and directly got to the point, taking out a small bag filled with Croton power grain. There were different types of power grain, which included bean-sized power grains, rice-sized power grains, and some that were just fine powder. But in the end, the worth of the power grain depended on only 2 factors: their ability to preserve strength and nutrition. The more strength they preserved, the longer they could be used. This was equivalent to a fruit staying fresh for a long time. Li Yunmu had verified that the blood essence of vicious beasts refined by using the refining pagoda was pretty good. After all, this blood essence had been refined by a transcending sage treasure which definitely surpassed the level of blood essence refined in the market. Regarding this, Li Yunmu was extremely confident that his power grain's quality wasn't inferior. Moreover, he had used his heavenly world's spring water in place of the neutral harmonious liquid, which was another necessary component to prepare the power grain. His heavenly world was a 2-sun heavenly world, so its water was much more powerful compared to ordinary spring water. Due to that, Li Yunmu wasn't afraid that the quality of power grain he refined would be inferior. But for the real quality, he could only wait for the shop attendant to test and verify to know the answer. As for the nutritious strength, Li Yunmu had confidence in his creation because the blood essence refined by him belonged to the vicious beasts of mid-sea region. The vitality of those sea beasts far surpassed those of land-type vicious beasts. Every grain shop possessed a set of tests to verify the quality of power grain. To do it, the shop attendant scraped off some powder from the croton and poured it into a water, after which he added some unknown fluid. Before long, the color of the croton poured into the water changed. Originally, the croton was deep red, but it began to change to scarlet, resembling the most beautiful cherry on earth. That redness caused people's hearts to palpitate and looked extremely fascinated. How can this be? This is the best type of power grain. The shop attendant found it hard to believe. However, he soon realized that it was highly possible that Li Yunmu was a noble, so in his heart he decided that this peak quality power grain had come from some influential clan in the central continent. Once the attendant thought of this, he was no longer shocked. There were 3 types of power grain based on their quality. The first was ordinary power grain which Li Yunmu received from Blue Moon Island. The ordinary type cost 1 life point per power grain. The nutrition accumulated in this power grain far surpassed that of ordinary food, while the highest time for which it could be preserved was 10 days. The second type was high-level power grain which was 3 times as nutritious when compared to ordinary power grain. It could be preserved for around 1 month. Although this sort of high-level power grain was only 3 times more nutritious, their value was 5 times greater. One high-level grain cost 5 life points. The majority of flux experts preferred to buy the ordinary power grain because they were more economical. The final type was an extreme level power grain which was 5 to 6 times more nutritious than ordinary power grain. It could be preserved for 3 months. Its value was 10 times that of ordinary power grain. One grain cost 10 life points, thus making it the food of only the rich. You are saying that this is the best quality power grain. Li Yunmu's breath froze the moment he heard the astonished voice of the attendant. Chapter 358, The Start of a Disaster. Yes, this quality is extremely close to the extreme level. If Lord is willing, then our high-rank grain shop is willing to purchase it for a price of 7 life points per grain. At this time, an elderly walked out from the rear of high-rank grain shop. Upon seeing this, Li Yunmu had a feeling of déjà vu. He felt as if he was seeing old Ho from Good News Pavilion again. Clearly, this old man was the true master of high-rank grain shop, since the youngster retreated to the side upon seeing him. Little brother, this old one doesn't know from which influential clan you come. My family name is Huang, and my first name is Xiang. Being able to encounter an old friend here is also karma. Old man and old Ho appearance scenes were the same. But this person wasn't able to obtain Li Yunmu's favor. With a keen intuition, Li Yunmu could sense that this old man was a ruthless old wolf, waiting to ambush him like a viper. The old man was clearly also a noble. At the moment, he wanted to find the origins of the nearly extreme-grade power grain that had come into his shop. Fortunately, Li Yunmu was no longer a rookie from 2 years ago. He simply replied, "Today, I have only one goal, and that is to sell grain. I won't speak about other matters. Old man, if you are willing to purchase this power grain, then I wish to offer you an advice, don't speak everything you have on your mind. As for the price of 7 life points, haha, if you stick with it, I think there would be many other shops willing to make a transaction with me in the Whale City." Xiang Wang's complexion froze. Li Yunmu's sharp and experienced words made him see this youth in a new light. Good, pretty good for a youngster. Unfortunately, your strength is on the weak side. Anyway, are you still willing to sell your power grain? If the price is suitable, then naturally I will sell, Li Yunmu said with a nod. Since the time he learned that the power grain he refined were close to extreme grade, he had been feeling quite good. Regardless of where he wasn't afraid that good stuff wouldn't sell. This nearly extreme grade power grain could be preserved for 3 months, without worrying that the quality would go down with time. It was certainly the most popular product in this market, so Li Yunmu wasn't afraid that it wouldn't sell. He waved his hand, and many big leather pouches appeared. Each one of them contained around 0 kilograms of Croton. But in the Whale City, this level of transaction was quite low even for this small shop. The shop attendant was startled. Without saying anything, he quickly moved to inspect the products and finally said with a smiling face, "All of them are good quality power grain. They're quite rare sight in our small shop." Li Yunmu didn't declare his position, but waited for the other party to say their price. Huangxiang then offered a new price. "Then if little brother can guarantee that every time he will bring this quality of product, he would only sell it to high-rank grain shop, then I am willing to push the price to the market one of 10 life points." 10 life points? Li Yunmu was startled. This price truly surpassed his expectations. Although 10 life points could be used to purchase extreme-grade Croton, it wasn't the price at which it was purchased by dealers. From what he knew, the purchasing price of Croton in the origin world was around 8 life points. On top of that, Li Yunmu's power grain were only close to extreme-grade power grains, but hadn't yet attained that level. "Yes, as long as you agree to this matter, we will not be making a profit in this transaction. The quality of your power grain would increase the reputation of my shop by a few notches." "That's good, deal. When I come again, I will find you." Li Yunmu's mood was pretty good. He was quite satisfied with the deal. As for the next business, he didn't say much. Even if the old man still had some ulterior motives, Li Yunmu didn't care about anything except completing this deal. Soon, he and the old man were done with the not-so-large deal. Naturally, this not-so-large only applied to the grain shop. To Li Yunmu, it was an unprecedentedly big deal. For this transaction, the entire stock of vicious beast blood refined by him had been cleared in exchange for 1 million life points. If he chose to change them for contribution points, he'd gain 10,000 of them, which far surpassed the pitiful amount received by the masters of first 10 rooms who had to undergo bitter hardship to keep them. With just one transaction, the contribution points obtained by him were equal to occupying any of the front 10 rooms for 1,000 days. No one else could proclaim to be able to amass contribution points this quickly. When Li Yunmu took out his flux expert tile and checked that he had received the 1 million life points from high-rank grain shop, he felt as if he was in a dream. After facing difficulty at each step since descending to the origin world, this was him finally taking a huge leap forward. It showcased the difference between Li Yunmu and other descenders, which would remain eternally. Because he had the assistance of the system, he could not only hack all the time, harvesting a large amount of experience and ability points, even the system's extremely accurate calculations and great ability to analyze were an enormous asset for him. If Li Yunmu hadn't used the repeated analysis to find the secret method to manufacture Croton, then even if he possessed the refining pagoda, he would still have been unable to make it. After all, without the system, how would he be able to figure out the recipe to manufacture Croton in such a short time? After obtaining this much wealth, Li Yunmu didn't stay at the Whale Island and hurried back to the transfer channel to leave. He had a feeling that the extremely good quality of his power grain would most likely bring a disaster on him. The matter had already taken a different turn compared to his original intention. But who could have known that the spring water of Tucson Heavenly World, in addition to refining pagoda, could refine such a high-grade power grain which surpassed his expectations. Naturally, even if Li Yunmu could change it, he wouldn't. He didn't regret the risk. 130 million life points was his first leap forward after descending to the origin world. As long as there was an opportunity, he definitely wouldn't miss it. Old Huang, he is gone. This person is extremely vigilant. He didn't stay in the Whale Island, but immediately left through the transfer channel. At this time in the high-rank grain shop, the seemingly harmless youngster from before had a ruthless expression on his face. Where did he transfer to? The shop attendant hurriedly but cautiously replied, Songlong Island City. Transmit the order to our people there to investigate this Zhao Yunlong. Your actions were correct, this youngster has certainly come up with a new method to refine power grain. Go wait with your clan to receive your reward. The old man's eyes narrowed. An all-new method to refine power grains. The price of a new method would be more than the price of a city or any sort of precious treasure. Old Huang had never expected that his Huangkin would surprisingly encounter this sort of heavenly treasure. Chapter 359, Normal Cultivation vs Quick Cultivation. Huang Xiang naturally didn't know that since Li Yunmu had dared to come to Whale Island, he was naturally prepared. While the power behind the high-grade grain shop was trying to investigate Li Yunmu, he stayed at Songlong town for one night. The next day, he changed his facial features to take on another identity before using the transfer channel. After several days and traveling through numerous channels, Li Yunmu finally reverted back to his original appearance and identity, after which he returned to Blue Moon Island. This thousand faces mask is truly not simple. After returning to Blue Moon Island, the first thing Li Yunmu did was to remove the mask on his face. Li Yunmu felt deep admiration for this trump card battle Sage Vega had prepared for him. Thousand Faces mask was a sage treasure which had reached perfection. According to Battle Sage Vega, this mask had been manufactured using the facial genes of 99 people. The one who wore it could put on any of the faces at will. Moreover, besides changing the facial features of the user, it could also change the emitted presence and flux energy. In the beginning, Li Yunmu hadn't believed it. But after using it once, he knew that Battle Sage Vega hadn't exaggerated in the least. In fact, she had only provided him with a conservative estimate. In truth, it wasn't a dimensional item, but a product manufactured by mixing dimensional materials with dark technology. Its effects almost reached the degree of turning fake into real. As long as it was used, one's features and even the skull would be genetically altered for a time. Li Yunmu solemnly put the mask back and left the 15th residential region to go to Blue Moon Island's contribution hall. It was time to digest the enormous harvest obtained from the journey to Whale Island. At the moment, he had 13,000 contribution points, which was enough to improve his strength in many aspects. Blue Moon Island's contribution hall was established exactly halfway up Blue Moon Mountain. There was a large number of disciples always loitering around it. Hey brothers, this is something good. I obtained it from a cave underneath the mountain on Thousand Island in North Blue. You can get it as long as you have 30 contribution points. Do you want it or not? Power grain, I have 5 caddies of power grain here. If you think that your cultivation speed is not fast enough, these power grains are exactly what you need. As long as you have enough contribution points, your strength is guaranteed to increase. I want to purchase Fruit Flux Pill. Ready to pay a higher price than the contribution hall, and the sooner the better. Employing 3 high-level flux experts for completing a core mission for a high price. The condition is that you must have opened 50 flux points or above and your body has reached the strength of 30 oxen. When Li Yunmu stepped into the contribution hall, he could hear people shouting everywhere. With several hundred people concentrated here, it was just like a small town. All sorts of hawkers shouting about every type of item made it feel as if the place was a market rather than a sect at the level of officials. When Li Yunmu came inside, he stopped walking for a moment, which immediately caught the attention of vendor disciples who began trying to attract him. After all, he was a noble, given his body stature, which was like telling the other disciples that he's a fat fish, both tasty and wealthy. Li Yunmu was looking at around several hundred booths in the hall when a person with a stocky build said to him, "This brother, I have some flux pills here. I will sell them to you for a suitable price, would you be interested?" In truth, many hawkers were waving toward him, but the person with a stocky build attracted Li Yunmu's attention. That was because he was surprisingly a noble as well. Although his body build was quite robust and sturdy, his height wasn't more than 1.9 m. Although weak ordinary natives were also of this height, this person was different. After all, he had appeared on Blue Moon Island, which certified that his height was 1.9 m because he was a noble. Of course, he might also be a descender from another plane, because of which Li Yunmyo couldn't help but stop and pay more attention to him. However, he soon decided that this person shouldn't be descender since an authentic presence was being emitted from his body. Flux binding pill? The person over there is selling it at a much higher price than you? Will selling it at this rate be alright for you? Li Yunmyo couldn't understand. Fet, which of the flux binding pills sold by that person are real? That guy is just a cheat, a specialist in cheating the newcomers out of the little money they have, the big person said while laughing heartily, his disdainful eyes focused on the other vendor. The big person laughed heartily and said while looking at the other vendor master with disdain. So it's like that. Actually, I also have fruit pill. What's the use of this thing? Li Yunmyo revealed his ignorance without any worries, since he was currently also a newcomer. So brother has just come to the island this year. This flux binding pill is a good item. With it, you can quickly open your flux points. We are both nobles, so I will not cheat you, I will sell all of them to you for 295 contribution points. After this, Wang Hu provided all the information he knew about flux binding pills. Once Li Yunmyo heard it, his mind was greatly shaken. It was the same as what he had guessed previously. The flux cultivation in the origin world was indeed different from flux cultivation on Earth. The main method used by the flux experts of the origin world to open their flux points was to use the foundational breathing method distributed by Blue Moon sect. Using this to cultivate day after day, year after year, and absorbing the flux energy drifting around in the origin world, one would slowly open their flux points one by one. Flux experts simply named it as cultivating flux, a short form for cultivating flux energy. This path was chosen by the majority of flux experts who used to be slaves. But there was another method of cultivation, which was the second cultivation path. This method was quite similar to the cultivation method of Earth. It used flux binding pills to open flux points. As long as one had enough flux binding pills, they could quickly open all the flux points and enter the Great Flux Master layer. Finally, Li Yunmyo had learned all about it. After all, he had been searching for a long time for the substitute for flux energy crystals in the origin world. And the answer showed up to be flux binding pills. But a new problem arose then. Flux binding pill was clearly a man-made product and wasn't the same as flux energy crystals formed by dimensional beasts of Earth. Then what were the ingredients to manufacture that pill? This question made Wang Hu feel quite awkward, for it wasn't suitable for him to divulge this kind of secret. Seeing this, Li Yunmyo gave up on investigating it for the moment. However, only then did he realize that the gift presented by the uncle master when Suolei had taken them to meet him wasn't that cheap. Chapter 360, Destined. According to Wang Hu, the price of a flux binding pill in the contribution hall was 300 contribution points. In other words, Suolei's uncle master gifting a flux binding pill to everyone was quite benevolent. 300 contribution points were equivalent to occupying the first 10 rooms for a full month. However, 300 points couldn't be considered much to Li Yunmyo. It's rare to meet someone like Wang Hu who treats me this sincerely, so I will purchase 9 flux binding pill. Without any hesitation, Li Yunmyo took out his inscribed tile and transferred 2,600 contribution points to Wang Hu. 2,000 contribution points couldn't be considered a small figure. Even the masters of the front 10 rooms could only obtain 300 in 1 month, which would mean that they would need to occupy their rooms for 9 whole months to earn that amount. Naturally, Li Yunmyo wasn't just having an urge to spend his contribution points. Once he learned about the effects of flux binding pill and knew that he was going to purchase it anyway, this was the perfect time to establish a friendship without any effort. To be frank, Brother Li, you have helped me greatly this time. If I didn't need money urgently, I wouldn't have sold these items which help us in cultivation. Wang Hu was very excited by Li Yunmyo's frankness and formed a favorable opinion of him because of that. Just as he said, he was in need of money, and to provide help in someone's need was much better than providing an icing on a cake. Thus, Wang Hu put Li Yunmu to memory and cordially gave him his contact info. If you have any problems, contact me. After obtaining the contribution points, he didn't remain behind to sell other junk. He patted Li Yunmu's shoulder and hurriedly left. Li Yunmu took the contact info. He didn't think much of it, but once he saw what was written, he was shocked. That Wang Hu was surprisingly extremely formidable. In the contact info, there was Wang Hu's residential area as well as his contact details and publicly known strength. He wasn't far from great flux experts. On top of the inscribed card, Wang Hu's opened flux points reached 102. The strength of his fleshly body had also reached 68 oxen. When Li Yunmu saw the strength of the outspoken and humble Wang Hu, he was greatly shocked. If not for the card, who would expect that his strength was so terrifying? He only needed to open 6 more flux points to reach the target of 108, and as for the threshold strength of 50 oxen, he already surpassed it. In other words, even if Wang Hu wasn't a genuine great flux master as of yet, his combat strength wasn't much different. It has to be known that the great flux masters of the origin world had the strength comparable to new sages on earth. It was no wonder then that Wang Hu dared to expose the disciple who targeted the new disciples to cheat them, and the other party didn't dare to say a word even if they were outraged. Everything was because of Wang Hu's extreme strength. Li Yunmu's boldness, which obtained him Wang Hu's friendship, caused the surrounding people to focus on him with envy in their eyes. When he went to check the items of other vendors, he was curious about some, but nothing excited him, because none of them included something which he urgently needed. That was until he entered the main hall. At a hawker in the front of the entrance, there were some yellow books which attracted Li Yunmu's attention. That shop's master was completely different from other vendors who were shouting loudly. He wore a black gown while his face was covered by a black mask, which only revealed a pair of gloomy eyes. He sat on the ground without saying anything. He couldn't be bothered to talk with the few customers checking out his items, let alone shout about his wares. This is another noble, Li Yunmu thought. The person might have been covered from head to toe, even making it unclear whether he was male or female, but given his body size, it was clear that he was a noble. By then, Li Yunmu had become aware that the ones who had the highest authority in the origin world were the nobles, despite the barbarians being 9/10 of the total population. One glance at the contribution hall of Blue Moon Island alone was enough to see that all the good locations for stalls had been occupied by nobles. But this wasn't important. What mattered was that among the dozen books sold by the black-gowned person, 4 were surprisingly original manuscripts. Upon seeing this, Li Yunmu was astounded. Even on Earth, he hadn't seen anyone sell original manuscripts. After all, who would be so foolish as to give away the original manuscripts which could become the foundation of a sect to others? After carefully scrutinizing these original manuscripts, Li Yunmu's breath became slightly ragged. Even if he clearly suppressed his reaction, the black-gowned man had noticed the slight change in him. He slightly raised his head to look at him, then once more went to ignore him as the others. Shoot, what kind of eyes are those? They are extremely elegant. Li Yunmu's gaze barely met with that of the other party, but he felt as if something had exploded within him. His heart began to pound as if his mind had been caught by that gaze. Li Yunmu suddenly felt that things were getting somewhat out of hand. He was hopelessly enchanted by that gaze, which was as deep and serene as the sea. He was certain that the person who possessed that gaze was certainly an extremely unique and exceptional woman. In his entire life, Li Yunmu had never felt as he did at that instant. After Lin Li, there had been many exceptional beauties by his side, and he had met all sorts of good-looking women like Ling Shuang, Lin Yuero, Lu Nujia, Hai Yu, Xie Yungxiu, but none of them were able to make his heart throb like this one. Li Yunmu was aware that he was displaying a lack of manners, but this was the first time that he lost control. The black-gowned woman in front of him seemed to be destined for him. You want to buy books or people? she suddenly asked. Her voice was androgynous, so no one could discern whether she was a man or a woman from it. But with his keen intuition, Li Yunmu was certain that the one standing before him was a woman. When she suddenly interrupted his line of thought, he woke up from his daze. He felt an uncontrollable urge and blurted out without thinking, "What's the price for books and what's the price for people?" The black-gowned woman coldly looked at Li Yunmu and said, "Books can only be exchanged. As for people, you can't afford." His reply made other fellow disciples burst out in laughter. "Ha ha ha, this newcomer really has guts. He actually dared to hit on Knight. Young friend, you may have a good status, but Knight's is so much higher that you can only gaze from afar, but never reach."